Cyber 24 is presented by our friends at Valcom. Valcom is a Utah-based IT solutions and services provider with a drive for getting IT right. From ironclad security to computing and beyond, Valcom's 35-plus years means they have the experience and the expertise to help your business from desktop to the data center. Check them out at VLCM.com. And welcome to the Cyber 24 podcast, the weekly pod dedicated to helping businesses and governmental leaders better understand the often intimidating topic of cybersecurity so you can make better decisions for your organization. My name is Marty Carpenter of 24/9. I work in strategic communication, public affairs, and government relations. And this week, well, let's just say it's one that Facebook will not soon forget, and for all the wrong reasons. First, a whistleblower made allegations on 60 Minutes on Sunday and before Congress later in the week that the social media giant incentivizes angry posts that cause division. And on Monday, Facebook, along with Instagram and WhatsApp, platforms owned by Facebook, were down for nearly 6 hours. But Facebook says the problem was not the result of an outside bad actor breaking through its security, but rather a self-inflicted wound. We're going to jump in on that issue and the fallout that comes from Facebook being down for 6 hours. Our guest this week is Mike Hussey, the former CIO for the state of Utah. Mike Hussey, I think it's fair to say Facebook had a rough week.
I think that's fair to say, yes, to put it lightly.
Well, one of the more memorable weeks that they're going to go through probably in their history, or at least that they have to this point. And for a company where it's been a lot of just straight up trajectory, right? To hit some bumps in the road along the way. Certainly every company's had those. Facebook is no exception to that. But this has got to be right there ranked with some of their worst several days in company history.
I'm sure it is. I was going to say, I'm sure it was the worst week for Facebook, but if you always look for a silver lining, it might have been the most productive week for the planet because everybody could not get into Facebook or get into WhatsApp and all those things that go with Facebook.
Yeah. So can you help us understand what happened with Facebook? Tell us what went wrong and just walk us through sort of the overall situation so that we're all on the same page about what exactly went on. Because I think most people just know, hey, Facebook was down for 6 hours. That was really bad for them. But what was the nature of the problem?
No, that's a great question because early on there was a lot of speculation like, hey, hackers have jumped in, they've found a backdoor to get into Facebook and take it down. There's a lot of bad actors out there trying to always look for that open door. But from what I can tell, and what it seems to be that Facebook has even kind of stated, is that they had a human error. So somebody was actually reconfiguring something called BGP, is a routing algorithm that routes between these autonomous systems. So you might have a Facebook and a Google and an Amazon out there, and the routing that occurs between all of this is that routing is using this algorithm called BGP, Border Gateway Protocol. And somebody actually made a tweak to that algorithm or to the configuration and pushed that out, which in essence knocked down all of the routes that come into Facebook. And so, it was human error. You could actually, I've seen some diagrams of people replaying some of these routes that exist on the internet, and you could just see them fall off one after another. They're trying to reroute. So picture, BGP would be like if you had to go from Salt Lake City to Colorado to Denver, it would route that, you might use Google Maps or Siri to kind of map your path. And it would show you maybe a couple of options and say, hey, if you go this option, it's 8 hours and 23 minutes. If you go this way, it's 7 hours and 56 minutes. And so it shows you the route and the cost. And that's kind of what BGP does. It can kind of have these routes and the cost of taking that route. And so it's a very smart algorithm to network between all of these entities. And if you try and tweak that route and say, oh, yeah, that's the route I want to take, or that's my preferred route, then those things start to fall apart if you actually hit it wrong. And so from what I can tell, an employee committed a change to BGP and blew up all of the routes to come in for inbound Facebook options, and in essence took Facebook off the internet for about 6 hours.
When you say they messed with the source code, or to this type of code. It reminds me of the first job I ever had where I actually had to put out like an email newsletter.
Yeah.
And it was at the time, this will date me a little bit, but I'll say this, at least the organization was behind the curve. So I was using something even outdated at the time, but we were using Microsoft Front Page to make this, this email. And essentially with that, you would just go mess with code. And so you could literally change like one keystroke and then flip back over to see what it looked like. And it went from like what you were building to a Picasso all of a sudden. Right. So was it just as simple as someone could have had one typo in this, or is there more involved than just that?
No, I believe it maybe was that simple where they just, it could have just been one little small error in the code or the configuration that they were pushing. And then of course that gets replicated, and it could be as simple as, I did a lot of development on SAS, which was a statistical analysis package back in college days. And if you forgot a period at the end of the statement, just by one period, it was like turning your whole code into a Picasso where it would just fall apart. And so it could have been as easy as forgetting a dot. I mean, that's the kind of the simplicity and how careful you have to be. Now, a lot of times too, they kind of push things carefully. That's one thing that Facebook's really notorious for, is how careful they are with things they push out. I don't know if they had a dev environment that they tried to test some of these changes, or they thought, oh, this is just such a minor tweak, we're going to make this small minor change. But for it to proliferate across all of Facebook's routers was really unfortunate. And again, just yanked them right off the map. And so much so, I think we'll probably want to talk about this too. Facebook is focused on its defense mechanisms. And so, you want to shore up not just, your cybersecurity, but your physical security as well. And so the physical security was tied to those servers. And so when those servers fell off, they even lost access to the building. And so they're trying to enter the building. Well, they can no longer do it remotely. So the developers they've kicked themselves out of the ability to fix it. And then when they try and come into a building to try and fix it, they can't even enter the building. Their badge access wasn't working. They couldn't get in. They're trying to get in to figure out how to do it. And again, we've spent so much time on shoring up our defenses that when you have something that fails like that, you even lock yourself out. Now, what's the alternative? I mean, we've talked a lot about these things on Cyber 24, where you're always about shoring up those defenses. So what happens when something goes wrong and you can't get around them yourself? And that's why you need those contingency plans about how to get around even your own defenses sometimes. And I think that's what delayed them fixing the issue for 6 hours, was they could not get back in and reconfigure the BGP configuration change that was made.
It's really interesting that they would not be able to even physically get into the buildings. Obviously, I'm sure that sent a level of panic that was already pretty high up even higher. Besides getting into buildings, the as I understand it, there were internal services employees needed to address the problem. Whatever internal system they used to message or to email, that all of this was impacted. And so, they essentially not only locked themselves out physically, but locked themselves out of their ability to address the issue from the outside, but really lost to some extent their ability to communicate with each other about their inability to do other things. I mean, it took a tech company and made it essentially passing notes back and forth that were written. And you can imagine a company like Facebook, it's probably not too ridiculous to say someone probably had to go, where are pens and paper? right? Like, we're a paperless company to some extent. Where do I find a pen and a paper to get this done?
No, that's exactly right. It's interesting. From back to my maps analogy, if you can imagine trying to go from Salt Lake City to Denver, and all of a sudden Denver has fallen off the map, and you're trying to get into Denver, and there's no roads in or out. So if you're in Denver, you can't get out, and if you're outside of Denver, you can't get in. And so they were just an island unto themselves, and sometimes even among all their data centers, they're in their own islands. It took a lot of recovery to get those islands talking together and to create this, what they call an autonomous system, where you have a big provider like Facebook that has a very large presence on the web, all of a sudden is broken up into its own little silos. So yeah, even the internal communications was shot. I think those are the kinds of, again, I think you err on the side of defense, but how do you get around that when it goes south? And this is what the fallout from what you see.
You look at a company like Facebook, and they become, as a tech company, and as the tech giant, one of the handful of tech giants, they essentially can build their own system, right? Where they have tools in place where, like, hey, we rely on. We don't go out and get another company to run our email. We're Facebook. We have our own kind of email. We do all these things inside. I'm sure the same could probably be said for Google, for example. Like, I doubt Google uses Outlook. They use Gmail, and that's their system, right? And so maybe it's something that's unique to these tech giant type companies. But is there something to be learned by businesses here, that having all your eggs in one basket is a vulnerability for you, and saying, hey, maybe I don't necessarily want to have all of my cloud storage with Google, and all of my email with Google, and all of my security systems and my physical security? Is there a benefit? I mean, I suppose you're sort of rolling the dice either way. You're either all in with one company, or you mix it up, and you can have more problems one way, or one problem that causes a huge issue the other.
And you bring up a very valid point. Do you have all your tech tools in one basket? Maybe not. But I think what you do, and we've talked about this on the Cyber 24 podcast before, and that is you test, you throw scenarios, do tabletop exercises at your system and say, hey, look, what if we lost all connectivity between systems? If we lost connectivity to the internet, how do we get in and out of buildings? They probably didn't ever consider that might be part of the fallout, is that their badge access would no longer work. And so I'm sure they are scrambling right now to figure out a backdoor around for their own employees to come in. We have systems in the States, servers and whatnot, that if you lost network connectivity and you lost network in one area, you have another backdoor, a lights out kind of system that you can still administer servers. And so you have to have those contingency plans in your DR plan, your tabletop exercises. That's what businesses need to be doing, is going through these scenarios and just say, hey, hypothetically, what if we lost internet connectivity? What if we lost connectivity between all of our branches? Or what if we lost connectivity to the internet? Or what if we saw all of our data exiting the front door? What would our response be? And so that's why you need to run those scenarios as often as you can. Having at least a quarterly or maybe twice a year kind of tabletop exercise. Get all the players in a room together and run that drill and see what happens.
Smart businesses right now are probably looking at what happened to Facebook and saying, hey, let's learn from their problem. What do we need to review in our own contingency plans that would look like that? Because you're saying, hey, Facebook clearly, or at least evidently, did not think about what happens if we can't open the doors to physically get in. So there are probably a lot of companies going, wait, is that in our plan? Have we figured that out? Have we thought that through? I would imagine that a smart company right now is saying, here's a highly publicized incident. Let's go double check our plan and reference it against the concerns that pop up from watching them.
Yeah. And also, I think what companies may do to also learn from Facebook is there an out of band option, kind of what I was saying about administering some of our servers here. Is there another out of band option? If the network goes down, do you have a separate way to get in, and through a backdoor, through things that only your networks can get to? Or even once you get into the building or have access to that building, is there another way to fix the problems? And so I think you're right. I think a lot of companies should be taking notes about Facebook's response, and actually they've been very vocal about what happened and what they're doing. And so it's a really good use case on how businesses may learn from a tech giant like Facebook and how they might improve their own systems.
Servers are a key component to keeping your business up and running, but when was the last time you stopped to think about the security features on those servers? Hewlett Packard Enterprises has you covered. Introducing the world's most secure standard servers, Gen 10 servers from HPE. Maximize performance, achieve more in the same time, and lock down security features right down to the silicon. Gen 10 security features work at the firmware level, utilizing customized HPE silicon. Each Gen 10 server has a unique individual fingerprint, meaning that your server will not boot unless the firmware matches the print, locking the server end to end. Valcom is ready to help you refresh old, outdated server hardware. As a long-standing HPE Platinum partner, they have the skills and the expertise to help you maximize data center efficiency without stretching the budget. Learn more about HPE Gen 10 security protection at vlcmtech.com/Gen10. That's vlcmtech.com/Gen10. Allowing your employees to bring their own devices is a lot like allowing them to bring a security time bomb into work. So, how do you take the burden of onboarding so many new devices off your IT department without sacrificing security or policy enforcement? Look no further than Aruba ClearPass. ClearPass allows you to safely connect business and personal devices to your network in compliance with your security policies. It also allows you to access devices based on users' roles, device type, and cybersecurity posture. At Valcom, they're all about saving you time while still protecting your privacy. Dismantle your time bombs at vlcmtech.com/ClearPass. That's vlcmtech.com/ClearPass. As the minutes rolled into hours on this, Facebook, clearly had more than just a tech problem on its hands, because they could watch their stock price dropping quickly. If you go back and look at what the stock did that day, and hasn't, at the time of this recording, has not recovered. By some estimates, Mark Zuckerberg lost somewhere between $6 and $7 billion himself that day. That's a bad day at work.
That's a bad day.
And that stock price is still, like I say, just as we're recording this, it's still down in the ballpark of $45 to $50 a share. It has not recovered, and we're a few days beyond the incident at this point. It just shows, I think, for companies who are watching, companies who did not have to suffer through this, but are trying to, as we said, learn from the problems of Facebook, just how much a cyber incident can cost. And not just in, hey, we got hit with ransomware and we've got to pay a ransom and we've got to deal with regulators and so on, but the very fact that your business gets interrupted, there is a cost to that, even in this case where there's not an outside attack. Is that one of the biggest lessons people should take from this?
I think it is one of the biggest lessons. I think you should quantify, as you're trying to build resiliency into your systems, think, hey, what is the cost for me to build in that resiliency, or that out of band administration option, or how much does it cost me to have these employees going through a tabletop exercise? There are costs to those options. But on the other hand, just like you said, if you lost $6 billion, $7 billion in 6 hours, you can start to quantify the cost of doing these resilient efforts, or the cost of these tabletop exercises, and compare that to these costs from being down for 6 hours. And I know the stock exchange, they look at it as outages in seconds or even milliseconds, how much that costs them to be down for that kind of time. They were down for 5-6 hours. Can you imagine if the stock exchange were down for that long? I mean, that's tough to quantify, but that's why you start to look at, as you're putting together a resilient plan for your network, for your systems, a DR site, or you're running a tabletop exercise, you're doing all these things, you're running the gamut, and you look at it, yes, that's going to cost me something, but the alternative, like you say, is much more severe. In many cases, it's certainly worth the juice, or worth the squeeze to go after that.
Math is not my forte, but $7 billion over 6 hours, that's more than $1 billion an hour.
Wow. Nice job, Marty.
Yeah, thanks. I nailed that one. Yeah. But when we talk about that and you think about it in terms of, here's what the impact was to Facebook itself, right? And some numbers, and a lot of news stories were quick to kind of quantify that. But there's an interesting extension to this, because there are businesses because of the nature of Facebook, there are so many businesses that rely on Facebook as a platform to run their business. So the actual impact to this economy wide, whether that's in the US or just worldwide, what that impact was, even to just like a solopreneur, right? Someone who makes some kind of handcrafted thing at home and sells it online. That was 6 hours that they didn't know exactly what was going on in the 6 hours when they couldn't sell anything. So there is a big ripple effect to this. There's more of a cost to this than just the stock price for Facebook.
Something you're right. I didn't even consider that, but yeah, Facebook Marketplace, that's a huge place for people to make a living. And so people, their livelihoods were wrapped up in that 6 hours. And I didn't even consider those kinds of costs as part of that. So those will be ongoing for Facebook to kind of recover and regain that trust to allow people to repost in there. So that could be a long-lasting kind of recovery for them and for people now that may be considering other options to peddle their wares. And so that really is going to be an interesting thing to see what kind of long-term impact that has on maybe Facebook Marketplace or other opportunities. I think Oculus may have been affected too. So the gamers out there, they were struggling. What are they going to do with all their extra time now that they have the Oculus Rifts down or whatever? No, I'm joking, but yeah, I wonder if it's possible to quantify the loss in the industry. It probably even tweaked our GDP just a little bit because of that little 6 hour outage. We'll have to see.
Well, what's amazing is, if you go back, and I'm trying to think, what is the name? I'm blanking on it at the moment. The name of the movie that Aaron Sorkin wrote was it The Social Network? I think it was the name of the movie about Facebook's founding. And
what's that? Well, yeah, was it? I can picture the movie. I can't remember.
Well, one of the lines in there, there's a part of the movie where the character of Mark Zuckerberg sort of says, we don't go down, we don't crash, we don't go down. That's the thing, is that we can't be down for even a minute. And here they were down for 6 hours. And what does that impact then, not only on them and on those companies that sort of rely on Facebook, but reputation becomes something that's a really interesting one here. And I noticed, and I think a lot of people did, because if you're on a number of social media platforms and suddenly you couldn't get on Facebook, and I'm in my early 40s, Facebook is not a place that I spend a great deal of time, but Instagram, is sort of a boredom go-to. And so that was down, but I was on Twitter, and the Twitter folks were having just a heyday, poking fun. There were memes and there were jokes about Facebook, but there was sort of this swell as well of like, hey, look, we're surviving without this. This thing has a number of, this thing, meaning Facebook, is sort of a monster that causes different types of division and problem in our society. And there was this movement of like, hey, this is a great way to realize, go delete your Facebook. Now, I don't know how many users they may have actually lost as a result of that, but a social network, a social media network, is something that is only held up by the fact that people participate on it, right? So if they may have 5 billion users, and they may have whatever, 1 billion active users, or whatever those numbers may be, but if tomorrow, for some reason, they all decided we're off, the whole thing comes crashing down, right? Now, they do what they can do to try to make sure that doesn't happen. But I think that just the fact that you're down for 6 hours gives people a chance to go, hey, is this a positive thing in my life or not? And, a dip in number of users has a relatively immediate impact on a revenue stream for a company. So I thought that was an interesting aspect to think through as well.
No, that's going to be interesting. It'd be really interesting to see if somebody conducts a study on the fallout of this, and just to see what kind of economic impact there was. I mean, certainly there's a reputation that's kind of on the line. You kind of mentioning the bantering between the Twitter folks and Instagram folks, maybe, or not Instagram at the time, but some of the banter that goes on. So there's that kind of reputation at stake. But yeah, the ongoing reputation with what you do with Facebook, what you do in their marketplace, do you go elsewhere? Does it have a long-lasting effect? Probably. And so it's going to be interesting to see if somebody ever tries to quantify that kind of economic or financial impact to the company.
That movie, The Social Network, debuted in 2010. Doesn't seem like an
Oh, wow.
11-year-old
Yeah.
movie, but
That was a great show, by the way. I
yeah, it
really
was.
did. Yeah.
One ranking that I listened to in the last year or so had that as the number one movie of the 2010s. So,
Wow.
yeah, it was a really good movie. But
I was going to say too,
some of those things they said have impacts on what happened over the last week.
Yeah. So, and actually this one more point I was going to bring up as we were talking about what companies might learn from this. And that is when you are developing an SLA or service level agreement with a provider, they'll give you how many nines that you are up. And so if you're up 4 nines, 99.99% of the time, and then they don't meet that SLA, you have recourse with that company. And so as you sign that SLA, you might ask them how many nines, if they give you 3 nines, 4 nines, 5 nines. I know, Zuckerberg, he's always looking for, infinite number of nines, 100%. And I think that this is also a lesson that people might consider. Oh, I never baked that into my SLAs. I'm going to make sure that I have 4 nines with my partner here, as because they know the impact of their bottom line if they're down even for a few hours. So make sure that you have something like that in your SLA, that you're up for 4 nines.
All right, as we wrap up for this episode, I want to thank Mike Hussey for taking some time to be with us. I also want to thank our sponsors at Valcom. At Valcom, you get much more than a dedicated IT retailer. They actually become an extension of your IT team. So whether you're a startup or an enterprise, Valcom has the technical sales and the engineering expertise to make your business more effective and more productive. Check them out at VLCM.com. That's VLCM.com. Special thanks as well to our supporting partners, the Utah Division of Technology Services, the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah, the Utah Attorney General's Office, the Utah Department of Public Safety, and our friends at Secubond. You can follow us on Twitter at Cyber24_, or you can follow us on Facebook, at least when it's up. Hit us up in either place. Let us know what you think of the show, or if you have a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, that's where you can let us know what your position is. You can also rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. We love those 5-star ratings. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week, and stay safe online.